segment 6.5, management of assets. On the textbook, page 263, the question that I pose here is how would the ABCDs of IAM differ for a startup-sized company versus a billion-dollar enterprise? Now that is kind of the golden question here. How do we actually apply this to different types of companies and the sizes of the companies, things of that nature? We will actually spend the rest of Module 6 discussing that exact question. How do we apply ABCDs to the specific type of companies? So I will hold off on actually answering that question yet. I know that you're probably dying with anticipation, but we will be covering that in subsequent lectures when we actually look specifically at startups, SMBs, established corporations, and then exiting strategies as well. So in this lecture, let's take a look at the management of assets. Now, management of assets is often globally described as IAM, intellectual asset management, IAM. And IAM is just the general concept and notion that you're managing intellectual property. That may include trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and patents. So when I talk about IAM, it is really in the context of how do you manage your IP? If you're a company, how do you go ahead and actually do that? So my acronym for this is the ABCD. And the ABCDs really just kind of break down IAM into 4 discrete steps that a company generally will go through. Step 1 is to aggregate IP information, where you're pulling it all together. 2 is once it's aggregated, then you're building out some type of an organization or classifying things internally. 3rd would be to confirm IP matters. So that's, again, looking at whether or not you're actually the owner, amongst other things. And then the 4th is to develop IP policies and strategies. So we're aggregating, we're building out, we're confirming, and then it allows us to develop these IP policies and strategies. Let's talk briefly about each of these categories and what you would actually do if you, in fact, were managing a company's IP. The first would be aggregate. So that's our A. Some of the things you would do here is list any item which has been created by the company, list what products or items have been protected, list all known IP items relating to the company, relating to acquisitions, and relating to other agreements. So, for example, cross-licensing, that would go into your management of aggregating this information, because it is now a right that you hold, that you can use the IP associated with whatever is being cross-licensed to you. In like manner, if you're acquiring a company, you acquire the rights to those patents. And so you would want to make sure, at least that's often the case, you'd want to make sure that you are actually pulling those patents into your global portfolio as well. So the whole idea of aggregation is that you know what it is that you have. Some companies, and I would say too frequently, many companies don't even know what type of IP they own. And that may be shocking to you, but the reality is that, let's say that you're a startup and you have, under 20 employees. Usually most startups are flying by the seat of their pants, and they don't have time to, or the money usually, to allocate somebody to just tracking their IP. And they usually rely on outside counsel. But then let's say the startup then acquires a smaller company and brings them in. There's a lot of moving parts, in short, for startups. And based off of all these moving parts, moving all very fast, they may fail to actually inform other parties what is actually going on. Let me give you an example. There was a startup type company that I worked with, and they were moving very fast. So the founders of the company were day in and day out literally inking deals right and left. They had some very interesting innovation of things that they were trying to protect. And one day they came to me and they said, "Britton, we just want you to go ahead and verify this agreement that we signed." And I reviewed the agreement and had to inform them that by that one agreement alone, they gave up 50% of the company's IP. And that is something that's a phone call that you never want to have with your client. But the reality is that they were moving so fast that in their business mind, they thought the specific terms related only to that specific project that they're relating to. But if you look at the contract and the language of the contract, it would touch on each and every single invention that that startup, in fact, was coming up with. So they, in essence, were giving away 50% of the company's IP portfolio in one single night. So if you compare and contrast that with, let's say, a $1 billion type company, which I've worked with those as well, and the question there is usually not so much that they're moving by the seat of their pants as it is that they are entrenched in specific policies and departments. You might have an acquisition department, you may have a legal department, you may have a business department, and each of these departments need to work together very well to make sure that assets are being properly allocated. So business side may say, we have inked a deal for this acquisition and we're done. Acquisition department says, good, we are done, we are done, and we are done. The legal department comes in and says, great, yeah, we are done too. But at the end of the day, although on paper everything looks done, somebody may forget to actually file some papers that actually show that the assignment has been made. So as far as actually affecting the assignment, you actually don't even need to file it with the patent office, but you need to take specific steps to ensure that it is being completed. And what may occur is that all the papers may be signed, but the information and the management may not necessarily get transferred into the acquiring company. For example, the company that's being acquired may use one firm and the acquiring company may use a different firm. And when they actually are swallowed up into one conglomerate, they may still be using that the main company's firm, not realizing that there are other assets that are being managed by another firm that have not in fact even been transferred to the main firm that they use. So it gives you some ideas as to why it is that we need to aggregate to make sure that we understand what is going on with respect to our IP. When somebody asks, what do we have? You need a good response as to exactly what is there. Second is you build. And by building, I simply mean that you're organizing your intellectual property. So you may do that on a simple spreadsheet. You may have it in a database. I've done both, depending on the needs of my clients. But the idea here is that at a minimum, it would be just some listing of the assets based off of our aggregation of Part A. And in relation to that, you may also want to put in other notes relating to the assets. So for example, if the inventors indicate, hey, this has particular relevancy to an up-and-coming new wireless standard, you might want to put that into your database, because 10 years from now, when a wireless manufacturer comes to you and says, hey, you're infringing our patents, you would be able to go into your database. And on one hand, you could search through millions and millions of things, or you can just go to your spreadsheet or your database into one field of potential notes of indication. And you can search for just a keyword of wireless technology or wireless protocols. And you can get an immediate list as to assets that would be relevant to that which has already been organized by your internal team. Confirming may happen just as a general flow of business. So acquisitions may occur, bank liens often may occur with respect to patents in particular, and yes, employees may leave. So when they leave, you need to make sure that the rights according to the company have been properly assigned to the company. So this could be in a standard contractual obligation document that the employee signs when they sign on to the company, where they indicate that everything that is created under the terms of their employment belong to the employer. But what may happen is that you may have lots of thousands and thousands of employees all over the world, and suddenly one employee leaves, and you have to ask the question, wait, did all those agreements get in place before the employee left? And if they didn't, then it becomes a very big hassle to try to track down that inventor at a later time, who often doesn't have any incentive now to even work with the former company. So you want to make sure that your internal policies are in place. One, to make sure that things are getting done that need to get done. The contracts are being signed, the policies are being maintained, and not only that, but the entity is truly the owner of the assets. And you may say, well, again, isn't that kind of Wouldn't that occur automatically? But let's assume that you are now acquiring a company, and that acquiring a company, or the company that's being acquired, their name obviously is different than the acquired of the acquiring company. And so this difference in name, there needs to be a change in ownership often to the new company. Now, there are some instances where they may keep the acquired company as a separate subdivision of the acquiring company. And they may do that for tax reasons, where it is they're located, things of that nature. And so in which case, you may still keep that acquired company as a separate name, different than the parent company. So in short, you need to know where actually the IP is flowing to, and whether or not the entity to which it is flowing to is proper. D is all about developing. So we've identified, we've organized, and we've confirmed. And then you're really in a position to take a step back and say, what do we do now? So now that we know what we have, and now that we've organized it in some manner, then now we may be able to rank the assets. Or now that we've been able to look at the market, or rather now that we have the entire assets in one aggregation, now we can look at the market and say, what is the applicability of our portfolio to the market? So it allows you to really develop the flow of intellectual property in a manner that makes sense. For example, it doesn't make sense if, let's say that you're a company and you own 100 patents, and 20 of those patents relate to technology that was relevant 10 years ago, but which 5 years ago was phased out. In other words, the market decided to take a different direction. Therefore, maintaining those assets may not make sense. But under a typical type approach for company, they may simply say, we maintain, we maintain, we maintain. But that's millions of dollars potentially that could be funneled back into further research and development, which would allow for new innovation to surface. So when you're in the development phase, it's all about whether or not the money is being allocated in a proper manner. And you can be looking at the market, you can be looking at your competitors, you can be looking at your own internal IP policies as to whether or not there are incentives in place to really incentivize your inventors to come up with new inventions. Whether or not you have an adequate budget to not only go after protecting, but also go after developing and looking at the market and being able to assess, do we want to go offensively, or are we only a defensive type company? So a lot of the strategies that we looked at before come into play, in particular with respect to development, because are you in a position where you can take action, or are you still scrambling to try to figure out what it is that your company has, in which case you're still back at step A of the ABCDs.